This is Patrick Russell. I'm interviewing Robert Ford for the first time. This interview is taking place on August the 10th, 2021, and we are in Okeene, Oklahoma.
Yes.
This interview is being conducted by the Making History Project. How are you doing today, Bob?
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks for calling me Bob, because nobody knows me by Robert.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
And can you please tell me your birth date?
4 August 44, and just turned 77.
All right, looking good. And where were you born?
Shawnee, Oklahoma.
All right, and can you describe your hometown for me when you were growing up? What was it like?
I don't know how anybody could have had a better childhood. I really don't. For one thing, I was a middle child, and so I was on my own all the time. And I knew as long as I didn't get in trouble and got home for dinner, I was just fine. And my mom even said I could always take care of myself. I would even walk myself to kindergarten, she said. I said, no other kid walked themselves to kindergarten, and I always could. But every day was a big adventure. I lived 3 blocks from the country, and fishing, hunting was available every step of the way. And I always, even as a kid, I carried a slingshot, a bow and arrow. I always had I called it a Bowie knife. It was a small knife, but I always carried a knife and a fishing pole. And every day, especially in the summer, was a big adventure until I was old enough to play ball, and I loved sports. And I played everything competitively all the way through high school and some in college. So, but my childhood could not have been better. It really couldn't. Bicycle everywhere, knew everybody in town. Everybody knew you. You walk down Main Street and say, hey, there's Bobby Ford. Good to see you. I mean, everybody knew you. I loved growing up in Shawnee.
And how big is Shawnee?
At the time, it was about 20,000 maybe, at the very most. But it didn't seem, when you say 20,000, it seemed like a lot, but it wasn't a lot when you grow up in it, because you knew everybody in every neighborhood. So, couldn't have been a better growing up.
And is it in a rural area?
Not really. We're east of Oklahoma City, about 30 miles. And so, as far as being Oklahoma City, no, not by any means. But as far as being a small town that was kind of autonomous, sure. We had everything available to us in the way of stores. Whatever you needed was there. And every day was filled with your buddies, and we hung around together and played together. Everything about it was good. Not one thing. I can't think of one thing that was a deficiency at all.
And what's Shawnee known for?
Well, for one thing, we have a flour mill, and I was very, very proud of the fact that my grandfather started the flour mill in 1906, which was a year before Oklahoma statehood. And so it had been around a while. And my grandfather was incapacitated as early as when I was in the 8th grade. And my dad was president of the flour mill. And so he had high status in the town. There's no question about that, but I never felt that. I just felt like he was just one of the other men that wore a shirt and tie. But yeah, the flour mill was a good-sized flour mill. And we had several satellites at the time, one of which was where I'm living now at Okeene. We have a flour mill here. But growing up at Shawnee, I was, and around the flour mill, I was afforded the fact that I could go to work early. And so at age 14, I started doing stuff around the flour mill, around the office, and then by 16, I was loading boxcars, trucks, and working during harvest. And so that, and if you want to say a privilege, yeah, to me, that was a privilege getting to work. And so as a result, I was in a place that gave me the opportunities to learn how to work with people, learn how to be a leader, and that was and that result was very strong in my upbringing.
And how big was your family growing up?
Well, I was in the middle, and I had an older sister, Ann, 5 years older, a brother that was 2 years older than a little sister that demanded a lot of attention, 5 years younger than me. And so as a result, right flat in the middle, middle child, and I don't realize it, but as a result of being the middle guy, I was able to do things that probably others didn't, because nobody paid much attention to me. And so I took off and did things, but I always did the right thing. If it wasn't athletics, it was hunting, fishing, things like that.
And so your father worked in your grandfather's flour mill.
That's right. He was the president of the company that I always remember him being the president, the top guy there. That's right. He was the second generation, but he was the only one in the second generation from the founder, my granddad, that worked at the mill.
And your mom, what did she do?
She was a housewife. Always there when you came home. She was there. You kept me corralled fairly well. All she had to do was go around the neighborhood and honk once and then two shorts, and that meant come home. And I always knew that was wherever I was, I came on home.
And did she sometimes go on these missions to find you, drive around and honk the horns?
A little bit. Especially when I was fishing down at the, they had a real nice little 1 acre fishing pond that I would go down, and she would get, about 3 or 4 blocks away up on a hard surface road and honk, and she couldn't see us, but she'd honk, and hey man, come on home.
Okay. And where did you go to high school?
At the Shawnee High, and it was the only high school in town, and it was a town just large enough to play all the largest schools in Oklahoma, and so it was very competitive. And I played basketball and baseball in high school, and on some great teams. I was not a star by any means, but I was certainly a good team member, and I worked hard as I could every day to get to better and to better the team. And tough basketball coach, particularly real tough, but I enjoyed the discipline. I really did.
And so what kind of visions did you have of what you wanted to do with your life when you were in high school?
Well, I knew that I wanted to be in the flour milling business eventually. I kind of felt that because I liked the people that worked with my dad. All the men that worked with him I liked. And I thought, this is the kind of men I want to be around when I get older and start a career. However, one thing did take over for me when I started college, and that is that I just don't want to get out of college and go to work for my dad. And I had a strong desire to serve my country in some capacity. And it wasn't until my junior year taking ROTC at OU that I realized that the Vietnam War was certainly going on. It was escalating. And so I asked my ROTC instructor, I still remember his name, he was a Texas A&M captain. His name was Schroeder, Eldon Schroeder. And I said, Captain Schroeder, if I go to Vietnam, no matter what the risk, no matter the danger, what is the best way to serve my country? And he didn't even hesitate. He said, be a helicopter pilot. And I said, I'll be darned. I never even thought of that. And that's what I set my sights to do. I knew that for one thing, I wanted to test and see if I could handle combat. I wanted to know that all the movies I ever saw, you saw all the movies that were that showed the bad side, the effects of combat, and they showed the good sides of the heroic deeds. All the World War II movies from John Wayne on down, they showed all sides of men, and I wanted to see if I could handle it. I wanted to test myself in combat in the worst way, and so I thought, well, I'm going to be a helicopter pilot. And that's where I set my sights.
Did he ever tell you why he thought that was the best way for you to serve your country?
For one thing, he said you're going to be right in the middle of battle, and you're going to be needed in the very worst way. You're going to be depended upon, and I like that idea. I like the idea of being the guy in charge and being the guy doing the flying. I had no idea what a Hue helicopter was at the time, but I've sure found out fast. But I wanted to be the guy in charge of my destination, and I wanted to be the one that was needed, and no matter what, take care of the men that needed me.
And so after high school, you enrolled at Oklahoma.
University of Oklahoma in Norman.
All right. And what were you taking up as your studies?
Business management, minor in marketing and finance. And by my junior year, that desire of going out on my own and doing something on my own was terrific. I thought, I have got to get the heck out of this school. I'll do anything to get out of the world of academia. I couldn't take, if something would happen to take another semester, I think I'd have quit.
This is your junior year?
Yeah, I felt that. In my senior year, as a result, my senior year I took 19 and 21 hours in order to graduate. And I graduated in 4 years. See, I couldn't take summer school for extra credit, and you didn't have such a thing as taking credit in high school for college. That wasn't a thing. That wasn't even possible. And every summer I was either working or playing ball or going to ROTC summer camp. And so I had to get the heck out, and that's what I did.
And when did you sign up for ROTC?
Well, you sign up, it was obligated the first 2 years, but you had to sign up before your junior year for advanced ROTC. And that way, if you got $40 a month, and as a result, you took 2 hours a semester of military science, and then when you completed that, you were commissioned a second lieutenant, and you're obligated to serve your country for 2 years minimum. Now, since I volunteered for flight school, it meant 1 more year. Obligated, volunteer, 3 years. Because flight school took a year to get through. Along with your basic course was 9 weeks, and then flight school was another 8 months. And then in the 1 year, virtually 1 year exactly, when I graduated, or started, excuse me, when I started active duty, I was in Vietnam flying.
So the University of Oklahoma joining ROTC was mandatory?
The first 2 years.
Okay.
It sure
Is that
was.
still the case, or?
No. Oh, they did away with that. I don't know when, years and years ago. Probably close to after the Vietnam War finishing.
So it was like similar to Texas A&M.
Exactly.
Okay, but Oklahoma went its own way then after that. Okay. And so you graduated your senior year, and you became commissioned,
I did, second lieutenant.
and then you went on to flight school right away.
9 weeks of basic training. I was a transportation officer. That was my branch. I already had orders for flight school, but you have to attend 9 weeks of basic officer training. Mine was at Fort Eustis, Virginia, and you learn about the transportation branch as well as leadership skills, and you stay in good shape. There's a lot of physical training, but it was really not even close to flight school as far as intensity at all. You took PT tests, and but the weekends, gee whiz, you're off doing anything you want. Sports, basketball, go tour someplace in D.C., close to Washington, D.C., things like that, just fun. But then flight school was intense from the very beginning.
And this is U.S. Army.
Army, you bet.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about flight school. Where was that, and what was it like?
Well, the first 4 months was at Fort Eustis, Virginia, Fort Walters, Texas, primary school. And it was difficult to learn to solo to get started. Once you learn to solo it, the helicopter, then things started getting a lot easier. And I'll never forget my instructor pilot said I had a real knack for flying. He said, you're going to be really good. You're going to be the first one to solo in your class. And I was. I think after 5 hours, I took it up by myself. And I came back, and he said again, you're going to be really good, but let me tell you something. And he pointed his finger about 2 inches from my nose and said, don't get cocky. And I thought, good advice. So the first 4 months, you soloed, and then you learned how to fly into confined areas, land on pinnacles, slope areas. It was flying at its best. You're in a small helicopter, a 2-seater, and you fly most of your missions, solo training missions, and it was wonderful. And then you went to Fort Rucker, Alabama, and that was advanced training. And the first thing you do was get into another small aircraft, two-seater, but you learn how to fly by instruments. And so for 2 months, you never got to see the horizon. You never got to see outside. You could only see the instruments. You had to fly by instruments.
But you're actually flying a helicopter. Would they black out the windows?
Everything. Well, to a point. You wore a shield over your helmet, so all you could, without look, you couldn't look up. If you looked up, you had to look way up like this to look underneath the shield. So you had to fly the helicopter by instruments. It was very intense, and it took pretty much the full 2 months for me to be really, really proficient. They are constantly putting more and more on you to improve, to learn more. So it took the full 2 months. However, that instrument training saved me and my crew no less than 10 times in Vietnam.
Is this to train you for weather and night and?
Mainly weather. Well, and nights. You get confidence to fly at night in Vietnam, because nighttime in Vietnam is nothing like nighttime you ever see in the States. Not even close.
It's pitch black.
Completely. But flying in weather, and in order to complete a mission and get back from a mission, you better know how to fly instruments or you're going to crash. And you have to know what vertigo is like, and how you get into it, and what do you do to get out of it. And it happened 3 times. And if I didn't keep my head and do the right things, we would have been all killed for sure. And
Now,
so instrument training was invaluable. The last 2 months of flight school was in the Huey, and I wrote in my book, that what was it like to fly a Huey, that big Huey like that, compared to the small ones. And I said, let me tell you, it was like strapping your tail to a Corvette that could fly. I loved it. I loved the power, I loved the smoothness, and it didn't take me more than an hour and a half to fly that thing just like a Corvette. I loved it, and I could not wait to fly that thing in combat. I knew it was trustworthy, which it was, and it never failed us. And then after flight school, of course, I was on my way.
Now, flying a helicopter takes all 4 of your limbs, right?
Yes.
And you're always constantly working it?
Constant. Oh gosh, yes, yeah. Your feet, and then the power is called the collective, and then of course the stick, the cyclic is in front of you, and you just coordinate everything.
And what do your feet do?
Well, they call it anti-torque. So when you're at a hover, you're controlling the tail rotor. So if you don't control that tail rotor, the torque of the main rotor blade will start spinning you around. So you have to anti-torque. You have to have in left pedal when you're at a hover, otherwise that thing will start spinning around the direction of the main rotor blade.
Would you kind of, in layman's terms, consider that the brake?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So you can stay at a stationary hover.
Okay.
And when you take off, you have to do the same thing. Otherwise, the nose would want to follow the torque of the main rotor blade.
And what does the other leg do?
Well, it'll keep you balanced when you're at a stationary hover. And if you want to turn to the right, you'll have to push to the right pedal. But it wants to go to the right. It's just a matter, you have to control it with just a feather of a touch. But mainly it's your left pedal to counteract the torque.
Okay. All right, now we got our helicopter training in.
Yeah.
And what about vertigo? Tell me, how do you get yourself out of vertigo? Because I mean, a lot of people when they fly helicopters get dizzy, right? So it's a different experience.
Very real. And I think the two that people know the most about, remember when John F. Kennedy died in his airplane? Well, he got into vertigo. And when, the pilot that was taking Kobe Bryant a couple of years ago, he got into it. And what happens is that when you lose your reference, and you're depending on a reference on the ground, because you know that's stationary. The Earth doesn't move. And so when you're depending on that, and you're flying accordingly, and then all of a sudden you lose that vision due to low-lying scud or weather, rain, or whatever it is, but you lose that vision, if you don't instantly get over on instruments to make sure that helicopter or aircraft is flying straight and level in the direction you want it to go, then when you look back, and you say you don't see that ground, and you try to go back, you get into it just like that. And you cannot get out of it unless you get clear and you can see a horizon and the ground. Something you know is permanent. Your mind won't let you do it. And that's what happened to these guys. And when I got into it, of course I had a co-pilot, and I knew things were getting really bad because I lost the landing zone 3 times with low-lying scud. This is the first time it happened. With that low-lying scud, I looked back, it wasn't there. And I thought, God, I know I'm close. And so I went a little bit lower, and then, okay, then I saw the ground. And then it didn't look quite right. And then all of a sudden, the scud went underneath me again, and I lost reference again. And all of a sudden, I felt like the helicopter was going up and backwards. I was going inverted. And I knew what was happening. So I told my co-pilot, John I said, Johnny, get on instruments and fly this thing, would you? He said, sure. I said, don't look outside, just get on instruments, just for the heck of it, and fly this thing. Okay. And he hadn't been looking out. And so he started flying instruments. I said, you doing okay? He said, oh yeah. Yeah, I'm doing just fine. At that time, I thought I was going to throw up. And my whole body was going inverted. Yeah. And that's what happens to these guys when they get killed. I said, okay, go fly this thing 090. Let's see if we can get out of this stuff. In other words, go back to where we started, where it was clear. Okay. And so we go back. I said, let me know when you get clear, and I'll make sure you're doing okay. God almighty, I couldn't. My mind was just completely screwed up. And so we finally got clear. I said, all right. And even then, when I saw the horizon, it wasn't right. I said, let's go get some fuel. He said, why do you want to get fuel? So we got plenty of fuel. I said, that'd be good for you. Let's go fly over and get some fuel. You make the call. You do it all. I got out of that helicopter when we landed to get fuel, and I had to get down on all fours to make sure that this ground was not moving.
Wow.
And it took 15 minutes before I could get back in the cockpit. So it's real, believe me. It is something that when they say vertigo, it catches a lot of pilots that way. Well, you'd see. Kennedy didn't have a backup. That pilot that was with Kobe Bryant didn't have a backup. And when he tried to get on instruments, he didn't believe the instruments. And it flew it into the ground. Your mind won't let you believe the instruments when you're that way. So anyway, flight school was invaluable, saving my life a few times. and just in those instances.
And so after flight school, you deploy overseas.
Yes.
And where did you go?
I thought I was going to go to the first cab, and they were full of lieutenants, and so he said, go over to another place and you'll be assigned. And so I went to a place called Nha Trang and for assignment, and the guy said, where would you like to go? I said, well, I'm new in country. I'm the first guy in my flight class here. And I said, by the way, what's all those red X's by the 282nd Assault Company? He had a big board up there of all the units in Vietnam. He said, well, they're the ones that they took, that's how many hits they took last week. I said, well, I'll go there. He said, well, why do you want to go there? I said, I want to get into the action. I said, okay. And so a couple of days later, my commanding officer came down and greeted me, personally came down, and had that big full moon and a black cat on the front of the helicopter. And I thought, man, that's just what a war emblem ought to look like. I loved it from the very beginning. He just barely saluted me and stuck out his hand and said, I'm Chuck Ward, your commanding officer. And I thought, man, things are going right. I've got a guy that looks rock solid. I'm going to fly an aircraft that looks like a war machine. I'm on my way. He take us back to Danang, and he lets me fly the whole way back. We get out of the aircraft, and they're starting to fly a combat assault. And they said, Lieutenant, we need you to fly right seat, a co-pilot, right now. We need another pilot. I just jump out of the helicopter with my bags. They throw me a flak vest, I get in the right seat, and the aircraft commander looks over at me and said, Lieutenant, you're new in country. I sure am. And he said, watch and listen. Maybe you're going to learn something today. and we take off. I hadn't been there 30 minutes on my first combat assault. We take some troops in, we shoot the landing zone up, we take the troops in, they take off, he gets on the intercom and said, "You got it." That means I got the aircraft. I'm flying in a combat assault. 30 minutes after I get there, I'm in charge and I'm flying the helicopter. And so we take off, go back around, pick up more troops. I fly 4 hours, 100% by myself. They said, "I want to see if you can handle it." And when he got through, I said, "You did all right." The best he would say. He was an old aircraft commander. He'd been there 9 months, and he'd been through a lot of lieutenants, and he wanted to test me right off the bat. I know that because I talked to him later, about 2 years ago. I said, "I want to see what you can handle." And from there, it wasn't long, I learned about this detachment at Way. And I found out that they flew more, they took more hits. Matter of fact, the ones I saw on that board were all the ones that were taken up at Way.
When you say hits now, you mean,
Enemy bullets hit the aircraft.
okay, not necessarily knocked them out, but just hit
No,
them.
that helicopter could fly. Very seldom did we ever have to get shot down. The helicopter kept flying. It's an amazing machine. Absolutely amazing what it would do.
And the role of your helicopter, you're part of an assault group.
Mhm.
So are you transporting troops too?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the main thing, what they did down there. Now what we did was a lot different than that. Because since we were up at Way, it was totally different. But let me back up just a little bit. I found out that when I went in to talk to my commanding officer about the chance of going to Way, he said, that detachment commander is going to be leaving soon. But you have to be an aircraft commander to command that unit. I said, "Well, I'd like to try for it, sir." He said, "Well, we've never had anybody that made aircraft commander faster than 5 months, ever. And he's leaving here in about 3 weeks." I said, let me try for it. And I did, and the other aircraft commanders let me fly a lot more, and I got to fly over in the left seat where the ACs fly, and my learning curve went up, and I made it in 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
6 weeks, yeah. I was very, very, very proud of it. So I checked out an M16. We're the only pilots in Vietnam that were issued M16 rifles because we had to man the perimeter at night in any ground attacks up at that detachment. So I checked out my M16, and another aircraft commander came down and picked me up at our headquarters, and I was on my way.
Where were you located that you had to monitor the perimeter?
Well, it was a small detachment, the Military Advisory Command in Vietnam. If anybody's been to Vietnam has heard of MACV, Military Advisory Command. And those guys were in charge of the Vietnamese Army as advisory capacity. And as a result, we had Australians, Army personnel, Marines, and some Air Force that were advisors. And they went out on all these operations. And so we, as a result of our missions, were to help them on any problems that came up. And the reason the Americans were there, of course, was for communication. So if they got in trouble, they could call and we would communicate with them and find out where they were and help them out. And so we went whenever their guys were in trouble and were overmatched, we went to help.
Now, were you transporting South Vietnamese soldiers?
Yes.
More than Americans?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then, of course, you were also flying out some advisors.
Oh yeah, for sure. And the South Vietnamese were and I don't know this for a fact, but I can't imagine anybody being any better. The South Vietnamese up there were their first division, and they were the best. And we flew for them as well as their special forces, and they called them the Black Panthers or the Hawk Bow, and we flew for their special forces, their Rangers, as well as the South Vietnamese Army. And I always thought they were top troops. They were they were really, really good. And with our American advisors, they're very effective.
So your group was the 282nd
Uh-huh.
Assault
Yes,
Helicopter,
and we were that detachment up at Way.
and your name of your group was the Black Cats.
The Black Cats, or our nickname, that's right. And when you make aircraft commander, you get a call sign. And so obviously the Black Cat was our call sign, and the 2 came from the 2nd platoon that I was first assigned to. And when I made aircraft commander, 1 was available, so I took 1.
So your call sign is Black Cat 21,
Black Cat 2-1.
and that's the name of your book.
That's the name of the book, yes, exactly.
All right. And so now, after you said 6 weeks, you make aircraft commander.
Yeah,
Now you're flying on your own. Well, you have still a co-pilot, but
absolutely.
you're in charge.
We had 4 aircraft commanders and 4 co-pilots.
All right. And did you ever name your helicopter?
No,
No.
no. And the reason, whenever an aircraft commander gets in the aircraft, that aircraft becomes his call sign. That's how you're known throughout the area of operation. If you talk about a feeling of satisfaction and a feeling of being valuable, you call these troops and say, give their call sign on the FM radio and say, this is Black Cat 2110 from your position. What's your enemy condition? And there'd be a pause and they'd say, 2-1? I said, that's a front. Good. Here's our situation. And when they'd say that, you knew your reputation was such that you were known for getting the mission done. It always made me feel really good.
And did you have any type of insignia or cone art on your helicopters?
Just that Black Cat on the front. It's a big full moon, big full yellow moon right there on the nose of the aircraft with the silhouette of the Black Cat. It's good looking. It really is. You've seen it. You've seen what that looks like in it, and it's just what a war machine ought to look like.
And tell me what's on your war machine. What are you flying with?
Okay, the Huey helicopter had a crew of 4 and 2 door gunners. One was designated the crew chief, and the other one was the door gunner and maintained both machine guns. The crew chief, manning a machine gun on the left side, also served as the mechanic, the guy that made sure the helicopter was flying. And they were absolutely fearless and absolutely the most valuable guys you'd ever want to meet. They were all over that aircraft. They pre-flighted no matter when you took off. They pre-flighted no less than 35 minutes. When we shut down for chow or for any reason you shut down, they were all over that aircraft checking everything. Every push-pull tube, every safety wire, everything about it they checked. And when you got through with the day, they did a post-flight also. They were smart, energetic, full of bravery, and they're tremendous. The door gunners were absolutely the bravest guys you ever want to meet. They wanted to engage the enemy. They looked forward to it, and they did a magnificent job every day.
Okay, and you've got, what are they, M60 machine guns?
M60 machine guns.
Are you carrying any rockets?
No, strictly the machine guns.
All right. Any cannons? Nothing. Just the door gunners.
No.
That's it.
And we never had gunship support. All of our missions were single ship because we're in such a big area. We all branched out and went to different parts of the area of operation. So we were by ourselves on every mission. And so we just supplied all of our own fire support for those 2 M60 machine guns. For 7 months straight, this is hard to believe, but for 7 months straight, we had more confirmed kills in our area of operation, our detachment, that our entire gunship platoon did. So that shows you we engage the enemy more often, more regular, and we're very, very accurate.
And how do you confirm those kills?
Guys on the ground.
To the guys that you were bringing?
They'd let you know. Yeah, those American advisors said, be advised, after the operation, be advised, this is what you guys got. And they loved us as a result of that, because we'd not only get the wounded out, we'd come back for fire support. By that time, we knew where the enemy was, so they would hunker down, and they'd mark their position, and we knew where the enemy was from. And we'd come back, and we usually start about 500 feet and work our way down and shoot right into the enemy positions. The guys on the ground just loved us. Said, you guys are better than 2 F-4 Phantoms, for God's sakes.
You were like flying machine gun nests.
We were.
And who was your typical door gunner? Who were these guys?
They were second tier infantrymen, and it just so happened every one of our guys were all from Chicago to North Carolina, California. They were all tougher to boot. And I'd never asked, but I always felt like they didn't have a lot to go back home to. And they loved what they were doing. And they knew they would get in contact daily with my detachment, and they volunteered to come up. And they just had not got it out of their system. The thrill, the adrenaline rush of contact with the enemy was such that they loved it. And that's why they volunteered to come up there. I thought, Winston Churchill, I love his quote. He said that there's nothing more exhilarating than being shot at without result. And it's the truth. It really is. And we'd get through with a mission, or if we have to go back, I'd say to myself, how in the heck did we make it? And I knew what it was. These guys were so good. And I would ask him, how many do you think you got after the mission? I put my machine gun on probably 10 or 12 for sure. The rest, most likely, we knew we killed a lot of guys. For one thing, when you get shot at, there's a muzzle flash. And you can see a muzzle flash a long way off. Even in daytime, you can see a muzzle flash 400 meters away. You knew what you're getting into by the muzzle flash. And they put it right on those muzzle flashes. So unless the enemy was very accurate and had a whole bunch of them, I felt that we overmatched them. I felt that they were that good. We were that good. I'm here to as testimony.
And of course, the door gunners, there's one on each side.
Yes.
So take me through the difficulty of trying to maintain being level, balanced, flying, and getting in position to allow these guys to do their job. That must...
I didn't get in position to allow them to do it. All I did was fly the helicopter like a bat out of Hades. And they took care of from there. They knew what was going on. I would brief them before the mission, and they would hear everything that I heard through their flight helmet. They knew what we're getting into. And so from experience, I would fly and get out of the sky as fast as possible, or get to the landing zone, low level, as fast as possible. And so they knew exactly where to expect the enemy according to how high I was, how fast I was flying, and how low I was, how fast I was flying. They knew where to aim the door gun, their machine guns, in order to get the maximum out of them. They knew that from experience. When I'm flying low level, they always had it down and to the rear. And so if we saw somebody shooting at us, it took less than a second and a half, and that guy that shot at us was back here. And so they knew exactly where to shoot. You just wouldn't believe how good they were. Coming from altitude, of course, they have to shoot down and then out a little bit, or straight down, because they'd see the machine gun fire at us. But through experience, they knew exactly where to shoot, according to how I was flying the aircraft.
And you said you flew it like a banshee.
Oh yeah, we'd fly right on the deck. And for one thing, when you fly right on the deck, it's hard for them to detect from where you're coming. A helicopter makes a lot of noise. And you really can't tell what direction until you're getting very, very close, because you can't see it, because you're right on the deck. I mean, no higher than 10 feet,
Above the tree line.
or the tree line or into the trees. But in the open, you flew no higher than 10 feet. And unless they saw you from a distance, which usually they can't, because they're down in concealed area, you can't tell where it's coming. And even if they did, you only have 7 seconds before you're out of maximum effective range. By that time, we know where you are. You see the flash, they're on you. We proved it time and time again. We took less hits flying low level, like going like crazy, than we did coming out from altitude. We were extremely good.
Was this your training or was this your style?
Or style, it was. And what we're doing was developing, being able to accomplish every mission in bad weather, because we knew where you were at low level. You knew the landmarks, you knew exactly where you were, you knew what to expect. And so you could find the troops by going low level in less than a quarter of a mile visibility. Did it time and time again. We only had one small navigation aid. It was called a FM homing. It was just a needle that went this way or back and forth, depending on where they were talking. It would swing left or right, and it got you within 200 meters maybe, if you're really good at it, and we'd find them that way. And many, like for instance, February of 1968. The ceiling was never over 300 feet, ever. The weather was terrible that month. And the visibility was a quarter, at the most a half a mile. And so you had to stay on the deck to fly. But you had to know where you were going to do it. Anybody else that didn't know the area of operation, it would be impossible. So we got very skilled at that. I even ran an experiment one time where we were back, all of us, at our headquarters at the airfield at Way. And I asked one of my guys to go up. I said, I just want to find out. So you go up and come back and fly right over us low level. All righty. Okay. So we could hear him coming. All right. And I said, where's he coming from? Everybody, it was a total guess. I missed it 90 degrees. He goes shooting right over us. And shoot, I thought he was 90 degrees. Nobody got it right. You couldn't tell where he's coming from. So I knew right then, if we couldn't tell, the enemy had a lot worse time than we did.
Mm-hmm. And so you would fly in troops to an assault position, drop them, and then support them.
Mm-hmm.
Then you would also do extractions.
Yeah, medevac if they need it, and then resupply them.
Okay.
And they get in some real bad areas, and when they needed water, sometimes the most desperate people I heard were guys that needed water. And out in the jungle, you had to figure out how to get in and out of the jungle landing zones. And medevacs, of course, were very important. They needed to get extracted during the operations, so we do that. And then if I ever saw a body bag, or if I radio back and said, what about your KIA? I said, you don't need to risk yourself to come back for that. We're okay. I said, no, I'll come get them. And they always appreciated me doing that, getting the KIAs out there. They killed in action.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always glad to do that. And then after that, I would come back and say, you need any ammunition? And if they had batteries were low, I'd get some batteries for their the personal radio communication radios, and then fly fire support for them if they wanted some fire support. We were invaluable to them. We really were, and we knew it. And we would. Let me insert this. As much as we looked like, and to them we were God's angels, you can imagine. And they would come up countless times and jump on the skid toe and say, hey, thanks, you saved us. Well, way to go. Who are you? I'd like to write you up. I said, nah, negative write-up. I said, we'll be here for you every time. I said, let me tell you something. Very loud. You have to get about this far from their ear. And I said, we wouldn't trade places with you for 10 seconds. They'd always smile and said, and just think, God dang you guys, or something. And I said, holler if you need me.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we go on to another mission.
And how many missions do you think that you did in your service in Vietnam?
Well, we figured on a normal day, we easily flew 2 to 3 missions an hour.
An hour. And how many hours are you flying?
We flew over 1,000 combat hours. And I never say more than 1,000 because nobody would even believe that. But the reason we did, and the way we did it, was that we were in such demand, and there was always 2 airplanes up in the sky, Ford air controllers, that were in contact with every unit on the ground. At every fire base, every unit on the ground, every place where you refueled, anybody that was in the combat area, they had communications. That was their job. And so anybody that needed help, they'd key the mic and say, any black cat, come up uniform. And that meant come up frequency on the UHF, I want to talk to you. And so we called it the BS frequency. Didn't have to have strict radio procedure. And so we'd come up, and we had a pre-designated UHF frequency, and dial it in and said, hey, I recognize his voice. I'd say, hey, 27, Cat Killer was their call sign. I said, hey, Cat Killer 27, this is 21, what's up? He said, hey, Bobby, he called me by name. I said, well, I got some guys in trouble. You ready to copy? And that meant ready to copy the coordinates, where they're located. I said, roger that. And I would have a grease pencil, and I'd copy the coordinates. I said, okay. And you contact them on frequency, and then you give the frequency in a very simple code. He said, contact them on Jack Benny plus 1.2. And back then, everybody knew Jack Benny. You ever heard of him? Do you remember he never got older than 39? That was his way. He was kind of a comedian in that regard. And so it was 39. And so you dial in 40.2. Worked every time. Dial in 40.2, and by that time you knew where the area, by the coordinates, about where he was, the grid square, and because he'd call that the grid square, Yankee Delta, and then 6 digits, and we'd go toward that grid square, dial in the FM, and say, this Black Cat 2-1, what's your position, or what's your situation? And work just like that every time, and get through with those guys and get back up and say, this is Black Cat 2-1, any cat killer, I'm free, what do you got? Go on to another one. Or if that unit was in contact, sometimes we'd fly about 4 or 5 missions just for them within an hour and a half. And that's how we did it. Every day. It was going all the time. I never saw, I should say never, very seldom did I see another one of us. We were spread out over the area of operation. Very, very seldom. And even then, it was either at a place to refuel or a place that was safe. You could shut down and have chow, have lunch. And that was it. And then at night, we'd get together and I just sign the missions and we'd go over everything we just did. And war was a very busy business. As a commander, I had a lot to do every night in order to go over the missions with them and assign missions, assign pilots to aircraft, crew chiefs to a different aircraft commander. Had lots of things to do, and I had to report to a full colonel, the MACV senior advisor was a full colonel, and so I usually reported to him every other night.
And at that point, what was your rank?
First lieutenant.
Okay.
I had no idea I was going to be promoted to captain. That was the furthest thing from my mind. It was just one of those things that happened at the week before I came home. But all my missions were flown as a first lieutenant.
And then you when you discharged out, you had the rank of a captain.
Captain, yeah. And my men were all warrant officers now. I was a lieutenant, They were warrant officer pilots. They went through flight school as enlisted men, and when they got their wings and graduated from flight school, they became a warrant officer. It's a specialty rank, and they did nothing but fly. They were the backbone of the pilot world over there, and I absolutely loved them. Fearless, full of humor. They were absolutely great. To show you how tight we were, they respected rank, and there's no question about that. But I hadn't been up at that detachment more than maybe 10 days. Flown with everybody, gone through a lot already, and the senior warrant officer pilot, after I briefed him at night, said, "Sir, there's one thing we want to tell you." I said, "Okay." He said, "We all decided that we're not going to call you sir or lieutenant from now on. It's going to be boss." I said, "Okay." So I knew that's where I belonged.
Mm-hmm.
But we had such respect for each other, and very little conversation of our personal life, very little, if any. And we're strictly there. We're all dedicated to serve our country and serve the men on the ground.
And how long were you in Vietnam for?
1 year.
And did you fly pretty much every day?
Well, since we had 3 aircraft, they kept us in fresh aircraft all the time. And the aircraft was good for 100 hours, and then it had to go back for maintenance. Routine maintenance. They call it periodic inspection. And so that meant you flew 3 and were off 1. And so that's how we did it.
And did your helicopter ever get hit?
Yeah, oh yeah. I always tell people that you cannot point to one place on that helicopter, not one place. And that means the main rotor blade, the tail rotor, the skid, everywhere that did not take a hit. Every place we took.
The one that you were flying?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We all did. You know, I was nothing special. We all did the same thing every day.
And did you ever get hit?
Personally, yes and no. I had some shrapnel. Water around came in while I was landing, and some shrapnel blew up, and it was real tiny. Tiny little fragments went into my chin. My shield protected me on my seat, and then some hit me in the chin, and but I never reported it because I thought if it got infected, I'll say something, but it never did. It was like having about 4 yellow jackets sting in the same place.
Mm.
and I'd seen so many guys wounded, killed, and maimed, that shrapnel in my chin was not going to get reported, believe me.
Did you ever lose any of your door gunners?
No. A few of them took a few hits, but nothing serious. We got shot through the foot, and took some shrapnel, things like that, but no. I swear, I honestly tell people that I never thought I was overmatched. Very seldom did I ever think that I was overmatched. I always thought, and I'd say this to the guys, I said, you know, these bastards keep coming to machine gun fights with rifles, and we're going to win every day when they do that. Probably shouldn't have said that word, but still, that's that's what I would tell them. And I never felt overmatched. I said, you guys God, you're good. And they knew it. I said, let's go out and let's do it again. You bet. Let's go.
Did you always fly with the same door gunners?
No. Switched them around on purpose. I switched aircraft commanders and co-pilots. I switched door gunners with the crew chiefs. Now, the crew chief stayed with his ship all the time. That was his baby. But I switched door gunners every day, pilots, and as well as co-pilots. That way, of course, I get asked why. Why would you want to do that? That way, everybody in the aircraft, when that aircraft commander said something, they reacted immediately. They didn't wonder who said that or who was that. It was never any indecision. That way, everybody knew everybody so well. You knew exactly what was going on and reacted accordingly. It worked perfectly.
Did you fly in any of the major campaigns in Vietnam?
Sure did. We were, the Tet Offensive of 68, 1968 was by far the largest battle in duration of the Vietnam War, and the turning point of the war. And the focal point was at our location, up at Way. And we were a compound of 200 men, and on the 31st of January, Tet started. And we were surrounded by 5,000 hardcore, well-trained enemy from the north. And they attacked us for 3 days and nights at our compound. And as a result, the battle was raging in the city for over 25 days. And all my men were either, all the pilots were either killed or wounded in the initial attack in a bunker.
All the guys that you had been working with?
And 2 of them were down at Danang, and 1 of them was on R&R. And so, pulling, and, well, no reason to say all their names, but 4 were wounded, 1 was killed. So, and I was in the bunker right next to them with the Ford air controllers, and we didn't take a rocket-propelled grenade. They took 3 in theirs. And the bunker to the left of us took 4 rocket-propelled grenades. But mine didn't take a direct hit, only small arms. And we repelled that. And so after 3 days and nights, the Marines medevaced all my men out of there. And then after that, they came up to get me and the rest of the door gunners that were not killed. And they had to get us out because they needed pilots to fly into the battle. And I was the only one. Matter of fact, they thought I was killed, and they'd already reported back home that I was missing in action. But when they came up, and what they did, they came up under gunship escort with an aircraft to get any 282nd personnel out of there. And it was me and 1 crew chief and 3 door gunners.
That was all that was left?
And I'll never forget that the guy landed, and I jumped up on the skid tow, and because I wanted to see who was flying the aircraft. I knew it was a black cat. And he looked at me and said, "God almighty, Ford, we thought you were dead." And I reached in, I grabbed him, and the only thing I could think of saying was, "Are you sure this helicopter will fly?" And I repeated it twice before he could answer. He said, yeah, get on. I've been up for 3 days and nights.
And you wanted to get out of there?
Well, I was in pretty tough shape without sleeping and being under attack for 3 days and nights. And the only thing I could think of, I made it this far, are you sure this helicopter can fly?
And at that point, how long had you been flying with the rest of your crews before they got
I've been there 7
killed?
months. And
so you developed close bonds with those
gosh,
guys.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And you get so good. An aircraft commander, it took about 500 missions for me to realize that, I'm a lot better now than I was 3 or 4 months ago. But yeah, of course, you're not chummy. You don't know their parents. You don't know their girlfriends or why. I didn't know they're married. You just develop a closeness because you depend on each other so much.
So that was tough to lose those guys.
Yeah, it was. And when I got back, I was the only pilot that knew the area of operation up there, how to get in and out, and the Marines needed help tremendously, as well as the South Vietnamese. They were under huge pressure during that battle. And so I had to lead, I was the only guy that could go back, much less lead anybody in there to resupply and take the medevacs out. And the first time up there, boy, it was hard. It was hard
to go back.
Yeah, it really was. But I did it, and then I flew about 15 missions into the battle, and then they wanted to take me a small flight and take an enormous amount of supplies in, which I led myself and 3 others in, and I led them in, and we landed, unloaded, and I had a pilot with me that was very inexperienced. He's a lot older, and he had never flown very much at all. But he wanted to fly right seat with me because he was higher rank, and he wanted a medal. I know what it was all about. And he went completely berserk on me. He's screaming, oh, "Do you know where you're going? Do you know where you're going? We're taking hits. We're taking." And I had to turn his intercom off, turn the volume down, because he was interrupting my concentration and my radio calls. And he was that way all the way back. And we left, get out of there. He was saying the same thing. He said, "You're not going the right way. This isn't the right way."
So he lost his mind.
Completely. And by the time I got back, he had his knees up in the fetal position, just shaking uncontrollably. And so we finally got back to headquarters, and I had the door gunner take his helmet off, help him out, and he got out of the helicopter. And I never saw him again after that. That's what I tell people. And well, I knew things were really, really coming to a screeching halt for me. So I go back and I sit on my bunk, and I started feeling dizzy. I wondered what's going on here. And I put my elbows on my knees, and I'm looking at the ground, and I felt like I was having vertigo. Something was really getting to me. I could tell. It wasn't good. And so I was sitting just like this, and then all of a sudden, about from me to you, I see a pair of boots. And I thought, holy cow. And I look up, and there was some enlisted guy, some radioman, some kid that was a clerk of some sort. And he said, "Sir, you got to go back." I said, "Say again?" He said, you got to go back. They need you back up there." And I thought, holy cow, I don't know if I can do this. I really don't. I said, "How long have you been standing there?" He said, 5 minutes. I said, "Okay." And I get up, and I get my M16 and my flight gear. I start walking out to the helicopter. And I don't even remember getting assigned which helicopter it was, but I knew, apparently, which one it was. And so I start walking out there, and I look down, and I'm carrying my M16 in one hand and my flight helmet in the other, and I look down, and that M16 is shaking uncontrollably. I wondered, what's going on here? But it was me. I said, "My God, it's me." I stopped, and I put my helmet down, and I grabbed hold of my wrist, because it was just like that. I said, "Holy cow." I said, "What's going on?" And I felt like I was on a ridge of a cliff about to fall. And I even felt some tears come up. I thought, oh my God, I don't know what's happening here. I said, I got an idea. I turned around, and I started walking to the platoon hooch, and said to myself, "I think I can make it as long as I take another pilot that's as good as me, that's experienced as much." So I walked into the platoon hooch, and I stood there at the doorway, and I said, I looked around, and I had a hard time focusing for a second, and they looked at me like death was standing in that doorway, because they knew what I was going to say. I said, "I want another aircraft commander to go with me, Colburn." I called out his name. And I'd known him from my days back at Danang. And Colburn instantly said, "I'll go with you, boss." And he had never been with me, and he never had called me that before. He just knew that's what my men called me. And a big sigh of relief. So I turned and it did a few seconds, he was right beside me. And I got in the cockpit and I said, Bart Colvin, I said, you know what we're in for? He said, I know what we're in for. I said, I'll stay close. I knew what that meant. That meant, since I was the only one who knew how to get in and out of there, I was going to fly. If something happened to me, he was right there to take over. I knew that's what he meant. And I hovered out to get clearance. The weather was bad. Nobody else was flying. And I hovered out to the runway where our headquarters was located. And I keyed the mic. Nothing would come out. I thought, oh, shoot, I can't. Nothing's happening. And I took a breath. I went,
You can't talk.
I can't talk. Luckily, that tire operator knew that I was the only one doing the flying. And he said, 2-1, is that you? And I keyed the mic twice for affirmative and tricked it like that. He said, and he pointed a green spotlight on me. He said, you're clear. So I didn't have to talk. So I took off, started north, staying low.
What was your mission?
Resupply.
So you were carrying supplies.
They had some resupplies were on the aircraft, and then they said I had medevacs. That was the main thing. I didn't have a lot of resupply on, but medevacs were needed. The Marines were getting hit really bad, and they needed somebody that could get in there and get the Marines out. And so I don't remember more than maybe 5 to 7 cases of ammo was all that was on there. I think that was they just put them on. But the medevacs was what was needed. And once we got there and we took them to another place, we'd get supplies and come back. And so I take off and I practice a few words without keying the mic. I mean, like 1, 2, 3, 4, over, 5, 6, 7, something like that. And then I'd say, it's Black Cat 2, and then finally I felt like my voice was going to work. So I keyed the mic, and first thing I said, hey Bart, thanks for coming. And that's when he said again, you bet, I'll stay close. That's all we said. And then I took off from then on. I knew the radio frequency and I called inbound, and when we left the coast and started flying into the battle, we started picking up gunfire within a quarter of a mile of the coast. That place that was completely surrounded. We started picking up gunfire the whole way. And we broke in.
And are you flying low still?
Yeah, oh yeah. Maximum 10 feet. And we had that one navigation aid. And I knew where I was. We had a needle that would point to where the medevac pad was, which was 5 miles south away, a place called Fubai. And so you knew kind of in reference where you were from that needle. Plus, I'd already been there a few times, and I nailed the navigation perfectly every time. Just nailed it perfectly. And slowed up, landed, and put the Marines on, unloaded the ammo. I took them to Fubai, and they knew I was coming. They said they need some more up there, and so we had some more ammo. And so we put more ammo on, went back, and we did that 4 times. And each time, the guy at the compound and the one back at the medevac pad, just they got up on the toe skids. I don't know how you made it. God, they need you again. So you bet. My door gunners. Now it's kind of humorous because, it just seems impossible. When we came back, went to Fubai, we went to unload the wounded again. The door gunner said, "Sir, you won't believe what happened." And I thought this radio was coming from outside, because our guys had never talked to me yet. And he said, "What's that?" Well, it was him. He said, 2 tracer rounds went right behind your head, right through the cargo doors, zipping right between the door gunners and us, zipping through. And that meant there could have been as many as 7 to 8 rounds went zipping right through and never touched a thing. I said, "Are you serious?" He said, "Couldn't believe it. Just barely missed your heads and missed us." I said, "I'll be damned. Keep shooting, guys. You're doing a hell of a job." And I wondered how I was going to make it the next mission, but we did. And having Colburn in the aircraft, I could feel myself getting better, faster. Everything about it was getting better. And so he stayed with me that whole month, and we flew 60 missions into the battle, in and out of that battle, and we got through. And by the way, when I was writing my book, I tried for over a month, at night even. I'd say, "Okay, I want you to remember what you did at night when you got back from your mission. And I'll try to my best to remember what you had for breakfast, what time did you take off, everything about it." I couldn't. All I could remember was being in the cockpit. I couldn't even remember filling out the logbook. I couldn't remember getting out, going to have chow, sleeping, nothing. Only flying. That month of February do I remember.
The whole month. The whole month.
The whole month. Yeah, and we flew from February the 6th. I got out of the compound after the battle on the 3rd. My first mission was on the 6th. So by looking at my flight records, I must have slept for 2 days, because that was my first mission back, was on the 6th. And then with Colburn, I started flying with him after I had that incident with that major on the 12th. So then we flew from the 12th till the 27th. And then I went on R&R.
What happened? What was the incident with the major?
That was the one that got berserk with me. His rank was a major.
Got it.
You know, he was very inexperienced. I've told you all about that. But I tried my best to remember anything. And I've talked to Colburn later, when we were both back in the States. I said, "Do you remember anything about that other than flying?" He said, "No, I don't at all. I could not remember. But I do know I do remember. I do know one thing I did do is that a couple of years ago, my little sister was moving, and she sent me a letter that I wrote to her on February the 16th. I could not believe I had a letter that I actually wrote during that month, but there it was. And I told her that, "You know, your big brother would never tell you something was bad unless it was." Well, it is. I said, "Our aircraft that we fly every day in the battle is keeping our entire maintenance platoon busy every night from battle damage." I told her that in the letter. I wish I'd had part of that to put in my book. It was, I couldn't believe it, but there it was. I wrote it on the 16th. So, but it was a very, very intense, and we're very proud. But we both remember the same thing. When we got out of the cockpit the last time we got out, before I went on R&R, and the battle was subsiding by the end of February. I remember looking over, we took off our helmets, and we sat there for a long time, let the aircraft cool down and shut it off. And it takes a while for that main rotor blade to quit spinning, and we just kept sitting there, and finally looked over at each other, and I don't know who said it either, who said it first, or which one of us said it, but I remember somebody saying, "Can you believe we made it?" And we just nodded and got out. And the next, it was late morning, early afternoon, and I got out, and they had wanted me to go identify one of my men at a morgue. And I did that and came back, and the next day I went on R&R for meet my wife in Hawaii for our first wedding anniversary. So you can imagine what that was like, to get away from the battle.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was very intense. I'm glad you asked me about that because we were very, very proud to get through it and help so many men out during that
And
time.
how many missions do you think you ran that month?
It was most likely in the neighborhood of 60. That's conservative, but 60 for sure into it.
Going in and out, supplies, medvac, mostly Marines.
Yes, they were all Marines. And I even made a comment one time that I made a mental note that one day it's hard to tell a Marine's rank. Their uniforms are really, they're in battle, they're real grungy, hard to identify their rank. But I did notice that we medevacked an awful lot of lieutenants. So they were, believe me, Marine lieutenants were leading the fight. Bunch of tough guys, every one of them.
And when you were defending yourself at your compound when it started, you were up for three days. So you were using your M16.
M16, that's right.
And you were being supported and helped by the Marines on your base?
No, they had their hands full. We were just being supported by ourselves for what we had. And there's plenty of ammo. We never felt short of ammo, but we were strictly small arms.
And this is not your thing. You're used to being up.
That's right.
So what was that experience like? That must have been maddening.
You learn to fire whenever you think something's coming or a suspected location. You just fire. You just keep shooting at anything at all. And they had some flare. We had a lot of flares that they would send up, and you would. They kept them away. At least kept them away from us, from overrunning us. If they wanted to, I'm sure they could have, but they were being occupied by the South Vietnamese as well as the Marines, and so they did not concentrate on us in order to a full assault. Even then, we took 32 casualties in the compound, and we killed. I think that by known account, I think it was probably 40 enemy that were definitely recorded as killed in the outskirts.
And how many people are on your base defending it?
200. Yeah. We did a good job keeping them away. It was only because we had a lot of ammo and we kept firing.
And so you were up in the front on the bunkers.
Yeah. Yeah, we all were. Everybody had perimeter responsibility, is what we call it.
And you didn't get up in a helicopter to do support?
No, not then. Well, the first thing they did was destroy our helicopters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you didn't even have a helicopter. Got it.
Oh gosh, no. And besides, I never could have got to it. The helicopters were way over close to where that medevac pad is, and that's like, 8 city blocks away over a bridge into a compound, what they call the Citadel. So now there was no way to get to it, and they blew those things up.
And with what? With mortars?
Most likely, I would guess so. The only thing that was left was just melted metal and scorched components.
I mean, did they ever breach your compound?
No, they never got in. They sure didn't. Yeah, I don't. If they would, looking back, there was times when they could have in one area where they hit the warrant officer's bunker, but how did they know that they had done so much damage? The battle is very chaotic. There's not only the noise, but the adrenaline, and you're a target. You want to shoot your target before they hit you. It's really something. It really is. And every now and then, I don't care who you are, Medal of Honor winner, Special Forces, it doesn't matter who you are, you got to take a break and sit there and just say, God Almighty, I know I'm not ready for this, but I've got to get going. You got to just sit down, and it happened about 3 times. I had to just sit there and just look around and look at myself and say, okay, I'm alive. Let's go back. At the end of the 3rd day, before they came and picked me up and got me out of there, I was kind of punchy. I was walking around in full view, shooting at suspected sniper locations. I just think, okay, you haven't got me yet, try now. And I was just out in the open shooting. There was a large schoolhouse about 2 city blocks away, and I was standing right there shooting at every window because there was a lot of snipers there. And you just get that way. I didn't care.
Have you heard the phrase "war is hell"?
Oh yeah.
Do you agree?
It is. It is. In context, even worse than that. War is hell. It really produces emotions that you'll never ever know what happened. You know, we had. I've seen guys go completely berserk and not be able to function, their bodily functions, or talk for an extended period of times. Well, look at me. What if I'd have gone back to my bunk and said I can't go? I most likely got worse. I don't know for sure, but I wasn't going to let that happen to me. I remember making a mental note. My God, I'm a detachment commander. I got an aircraft commander. I don't want anybody to see me like this. And so I knew I had to do something. But if you don't do something and figure things out, you're going to get worse before you get better. So, and I have found out that a lot of this PTSD, I would say 90% is real. It really is. They have a terrible time coping with what happened, and they don't. But it keeps reoccurring. Luckily, I've always stayed real busy. When I came out of it, I stayed real busy that month, and by doing that, I was able to handle it. But I don't know what would have happened if Colbert hadn't stepped up and been right next to me. I really don't.
And before you would go out on your missions, did you have any type of like a ritual, a habit, a superstition?
No. Let's get with it.
Yeah.
You'd get the briefing, and of course I was very experienced and tell you this or that. Say, yeah. I'd say to myself, I know all that crap. I know all that. Give me the frequency and location, I'll go take care of it.
You didn't have like a lucky rabbit's foot?
No.
You didn't do any of that stuff?
No, not at all.
And what about when you came back? I mean, you mentioned a lot of this is adrenaline based, right? When you're out there circling and doing your 10 feet off the ground, and the exhilaration, the quote from Winston Churchill. So when you come back, what do you do to regain your balance or decompress?
Well, I had 2 days to think about it. One day to get down to a location to out process, a place called Camelon Bay, and they keep you there to do all the paperwork so you can leave country. Then it took pretty much of a day to get home, and I started telling myself, okay, are you going to let this thing affect you, or are you going to assimilate back in the public, into the civilian? And I recalled several movies where a guy had trouble assimilating, and I can't tell you exactly which movie it was, but I can sure remember details about each one of them, little details. And I told myself, it's not going to happen. I've got a future ahead of me. I got a wife that's waiting for me. I'm going to get back in shape. I felt like a trained athlete. I was as good a shape as any soldier, any pilot could be in before I left. I want to get back in physical shape, and I knew if I did that, your mind would kind of go with it. And I had requested and received orders to be a instructor pilot, exactly what I wanted to do. And I knew that if becoming an instructor pilot, I would bestow all my combat experience. And I felt like I was going to be the best instructor pilot the Army ever saw. Matter of fact, I remember saying, I think I'm going to label myself God's gift to the instructor pilot world. I had to have that attitude. And I felt like, that's what I wanted to do. And I said over and over, as soon as you hit continental U.S., you're going to do that. And don't let anything stop you. And so I had it made up, and that's exactly what I did. I had those short-term goals, and I knew I had the long-term goals for to be a citizen. But my short-term goal was to get in shape, be an instructor pilot, and get back and hope I have a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly what I did.
But what about when you would return to base after these missions?
Mm-hmm.
How did you decompress?
During the month of February,
So
I
even
don't remember.
whether it's that or
other than that,
other
the last
ones.
5 months in country, when I'd come back, after I came back from R&R, I would go to the officers club because I always came in late. Because all my missions were up into the night. I always come in late. It got to be kind of a joke. I'd call in as soon as I could get radio contact and said, be sure and save Chow. This is Black Cat 2-1. Be sure and save Chow. Roger, Black Cat 2. Roger. Well, they never did. And so I'd go to the officers club and have kind of a Polish sausage, floated in brine, and hard-boiled eggs, and I had some sea ration crackers, and usually water or have a beer with it, and then play ping pong. That got me back in real good shape. If you play competitive ping pong, it was really a good game to do. And I always played as many as 6 or 10 games of ping pong at least. Write a letter, and then get ready for the next day. I didn't have the detachment commander responsibilities. I didn't have briefings with all the pilots, meetings with all the pilots. I didn't have to have stand tall in front of the detachment, or rather the compound commander like a colonel. I didn't have that. I was more just a pilot when I came
What
back.
about before that though? So even before Way, when you were doing your other missions, how would you decompress? Same thing or?
Same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Drink very little. I never saw my men drink. I always tell people that. I never saw them drink. And the only time I ever had a beer when I was up at Way was when I played darts with the Australians. And if you win your dart game, you get a beer. And so I maybe had as many as 2, I would guess, before it was time. Because you only had about an hour there that you had a little bit of free time. And so you keep yourself mentally shaped. And never, ever, any drugs were never considered. Drinking, I never saw my men drink. Didn't have time. And too much was dependent on us. We were dependent on every day. And flying impaired was not even an option.
So in terms of the battles itself and going out, I mean, eventually it became, I don't want to say routine, but it became part of your habit, your mission.
It did. And it did, and you got better and better because you had to go into the same place all the time. And as a result, you diverted around to different routes in and out, and you got so you did all that in and out. And because each time you didn't go the same route every time, you get your tail shot easy. It'd be easy to do that, to lay trap or some type of trap. And so we always did different ways. It did. It's amazing. I knew I was getting better every time. And I even put that in my book. Having Colburn with me made me better, and I could feel myself getting better. And the radio transmissions got smoother. At first they were kind of jerky because it was hard to talk, but everything got a lot better. And they started depending on me more too. And you just absolutely felt responsible for the men on the ground and took care of it.
And going out and picking up the wounded or the killed in action, did you ever get used to that?
Well, yeah, you did. the only thing I did not enjoy, I guess, I don't know if that's a word, is an American. Boy, I hated to see those young guys and mangled up, totally in shock or dead. It was, I didn't like that. I met back a lot of Vietnamese, and you kind of were detached a little ways from that. But you couldn't let it affect you. You just absolutely could not. All you did was, it was just a glance, and you glanced at them, and the reason you glanced back at them is you wanted to make sure everybody was on board, and you wanted to make sure you got everybody. And that was the whole thing. You didn't want to have anybody left, a wounded guy left, and that could easily happen in the heat of battle. Didn't get the guy on, and I always would make sure by visually checking and then a quick radio guide to the guy in the landing zone. I said, "Is that everybody? Is that?" And sometimes you'd get an answer. Sometimes they were busy, and so you'd make sure. And so, but as far as an American, you hated it, but boy, it didn't stop you. You went all out.
Did your experience from war impact you when you returned home?
Well, of course it did. You know that, put it this way, knew I'd be proud, and I was. I was very proud. But I also knew that discussing this would almost be impossible to any of my friends or even my wife. They didn't understand. There was no way to understand. And my parents, they were, of course, happy to see me, but they never asked. Nobody asked.
Now, why would they not understand? Why do you think that?
They think that that being scared would be walking to your car at night or something. I mean, they just couldn't understand how intense it was. And they saw the Huntley Brinkley news every night, and they saw these guys in battle, and they probably just didn't think, oh, surely I didn't go through that, but we did. But I don't think they wanted to ask me just because they probably thought I didn't want to talk about it. That's probably what it was.
Mm-hmm. So besides not necessarily being able to talk about it, were there any other effects that you brought home? Did you have issues like with sleeping or?
You know the old saying, you've never lived till you've almost died. You've heard that saying over and over. And those that have fought for it, life has a flavor the protected will never know. And I knew that life was so precious, and I knew I'd made it. I didn't know why I made it. I knew my skill came involved, and my men were so good. But I didn't know for sure because I saw so many other guys get killed. And I knew that I'd love life from now on. And in fact, every night I say that. In a prayer, every night I say, thanks for letting me live through Vietnam. I appreciate you doing that. And that's true.
So did you ever have nightmares about any of these experiences?
The nightmares weren't really a nightmare because I always came out of it really good. I would have a reoccurring dream about escape and evading. And I'd get tracked by at least 3 soldiers with their AK-47s. Yeah, I'm kind of in a small hooch, kind of a building where they find me, and then I always reach down and I thought, I'll be dang, I still have my 45. I carried a 45 pistol along with. I lost my M16, or they took it. Sometimes they take it, sometimes I just didn't have it. And those guys would sit there and jabber something, most likely, hands up, whatever you would do. And I start to get up, and my 45, I said, oh, be dang. These idiots didn't say I had a 45. I go, boom, 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 just like it. And I thought, you dummies. And that's when I wake up. I came out of it okay.
What about in terms of like hypervigilance or like scanning and looking for dangers, things like that? Did you have any of those type of habits when you came home?
Well, I've
Loud
always,
noises bother you?
oh God, loud noises to this day. Any sudden noise, it goes through me. Just, I flinch. Oh yeah, I don't like anybody behind me. I'm sure that's everybody's ever been in combat. You like to have your field of vision not obscured.
Mm-hmm.
But loud noises are still god awful.
Yeah.
They really are. I don't tell anybody, you know, if they do it, I just say, hey, don't do that. I don't make a big deal out of it. But as far as hyper, I have always had a lot of energy, you know, and ever since then I've always wanted to be active.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very active. I played all the sports, and of course, you know, how many people do triathlons, for gosh sakes, unless you border on the hyperactivity.
Mm-hmm.
But I trained and competed in triathlons, and anyway, stay in shape.
And when did you return to the States from Vietnam?
It was 20 July of '68.
All right.
It was landed at Fort Lewis, Washington, and there was a few of us that had seen a lot of combat, and there was quite a few that did not, that were on the aircraft. And as soon as it landed, they started to cheer, and they looked over at us, and we were just glad to be there. No cheers, and so everybody, it was very subdued when they saw the guys that had been in combat not do anything. It's just, I can't believe we made it. I could not believe that aircraft was on U.S. soil.
And did you have any issues with protesters when you returned home?
I of course heard about it, and I did not. I stayed away from them. I didn't go seek them out. Otherwise, I knew I would probably get kind of upset. But we were so busy. We were accomplishing every mission. You know, Bobby Kennedy and Reverend King were assassinated when I was over in Vietnam, and it was hardly even discussed. That's not good. But that's it. Everything took backseat to accomplishing your mission. And so when I came home, knowing there was going to be protesters and such, I can remember singing, oh, you know, the flower and all that. And I knew it would probably upset me. And so I completely stayed away from it. And as a result, coming back to Oklahoma and Texas, you're not going to see a lot of that. And that's where I, of course, ended up. And as a result, I never had any confrontation with them.
And then, did you stay in the Army for about one more year?
That's it. And I was an instructor pilot.
All right. And where were you doing your instructions?
Fort Walters, Texas. It's a wonderful duty. Fort Walters, Texas is by Mineral Wells, Texas. Texas there are no better people than
Except Oklahoma.
And Oklahoma and Texas. I'm serious. They're no better. And they were wonderful to all the soldiers. And it was the most perfect duty to have. Being an instructor, I was able to fly with one officer candidate, student pilots. I was able to fly the third and fourth month. That's when you take them out and you teach them the confined areas and the pinnacles. You teach them night cross country. You teach them how to land the helicopter without power to the ground, day and night. And it's flying at its best. I loved every minute of it.
And were they picking your brain, knowing your reputation?
They always wanted to know everything. Yeah, they always did. And always took the time to tell. They were tremendous kids. And getting to fly day and night in a safe landing zone, safe area, it was exhilarating, knowing that you're safe.
what kind of advice did you give them
Oh, I just
about
told
what they were going to see, feel, or experience?
I told them to get as good as you can. Make sure you graduate from that instrument part of flight school top notch. Learn every bit of that and go over and above during the instrument training, because it's going to save your tokus when you get over to Vietnam someday when you become aircraft commander. And I said, and fly with guys that are as motivated as you. Always fly with those kind of guys that have the same type of view as you. I flew with very, very few commissioned officers. Maybe, not more than 30 missions, maybe. The rest were with warrants. They had the same makeup as I did. Most commissioned officers had command duty and didn't fly as much. And that's not who you want when it gets right down to the heat of battle. I flew with warrant officers. I'm here because of them. And that's what I told them. I said, you pick the guys now. You make sure. And keep yourself in good physical shape. This stuff about a pilot at night yelling and screaming, rah, all this drunken brawl, that's it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. Keep in shape, mentally and physically over there. You'll come back alive. I told them that over and over again. And I did. I always heard mental health and physical health go hand in hand. And I promised myself that I would stay in shape when I came back from Vietnam. I did.
And what did you do after your military career in 1970, 69, 70?
I took 6 days off and came out here and to operate this flour mill that we have as part of the Shawnee Milling Company. And my dad wanted me to come out here, learn the business, become the manager, and then come back to Shawnee as part of the team back at Shawnee. Well, I like being on my own, and I like calling the shots, and I knew if I made this a success, that I'd stay here, and that's what I've done. I've been here since July of 1969.
In Okeene.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Sure have.
And you had a family, you got married?
Got married, and I've had 3 kids, and I'm no longer married. I haven't been married since 1991 or 92, something like that. But great kids. Still have a good, warm relationship with my ex-wife, and have not been married since, by the way. And the kids are highly successful. Great kids. Still my wonderful, put it that way.
Okay. Is there anything you would like to add that I did not ask you?
Well, only that we took the risk, all of us. And if I could quote Winston Churchill again, I think he put it very, very well. Because we served our country when duty called us, and we asked for no reward except our nation's thanks. And Winston Churchill, I think, said it best, because we took a risk. We knew that. We knew what the risk was. But Winston said that without risk, there could be no honor, no glory, and no adventure. And I feel like that we have brought honor to our family. I feel like we have brought glory to our country. And boy, we went on an adventure.
For sure.
Yeah.
A year-long adventure. And you end up writing a book, right?
I did, and I'm very, very proud of it. I feel like I've honored all those that stepped up and went to Vietnam, and for sure those that volunteered to fly combat, and I have a personal experience with. I feel like I've honored every one of them, from the clerk typist all the way up to the guy who was in the right seat with me. Every one of them served with honor.
And could you show us a copy of your book?
This is the cover of it, and
Can you put it up closer? And then up a little bit.
There we go.
There you go. All right, Black Cat 21.
And that, well,
2-1.
that's the reason I put the dash. If I hadn't put the dash, everybody would say 21. Well, you don't say 21 over a radio. You don't say 21 or 36. You say 21 or 36 because you cannot make a mistake over the radio. It can't get blurred together. It just sound like one word if you try to say all those together. You say them separately and you say them right. Just like O is 0 and 9 and 5 sound alike, so you probably heard somebody say niner. That's why. Over radio, 9 and 5 sound just alike, so you have to separate it. And letters of the alphabet, you never say the letter of an alphabet. Remember when I told you earlier we went to Yankee Delta grid square? Well, that's the phonetic alphabet for YD. It's that simple. You use the phonetic alphabet for every letter. You cannot afford to make a mistake. Somebody dies if you do. So that's the reason I had to put the dash for civilian types. There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay. Black Cat 2-1.
That's that.
All right. Is there anything you would like to tell future generations? Any words of wisdom or advice?
The only word of wisdom is keep your body in shape. Keep your body in shape. Your mind, body go right together. And if you want to know, and if you want any of your friends to know what it was like for motivated Americans to serve their country, read my book. Because we serve with honor and dedication, and we feel that way to this day.
Well, Bob, it's been an honor to sit with you, and
It's my honor, believe me. Thank you.
And I want to thank you for taking the time to share your story and for your dedication and service to our country.
I appreciate that very much, and anytime you holler back at me.
All right, thank you, sir.
Welcome.